For 7 years, Adam Schiff repeatedly informed the nation that he possessed proof. Currently, for the initial instance in his professional life, the person opposite him actually held documentation, and it did not concern Trump. Before the Senate Intelligence Committee, Tulsi Gabbard revealed a restricted binder and uttered half a dozen words that effectively brought Adam Schiff's career to a close. Senator Schiff, every single fabrication creates a documentary record, and I possess all of your documentary records. The events that unfolded over the subsequent 4 hours would thoroughly ruin the individual previously labeled by CNN as the moral compass of Congress. Support this content because you are on the verge of observing an unprecedented event in the history of American politics, the most prolific fabricator in legislative memory being overwhelmed by his personal statements, his actual records, and his voluminous falsehoods, down to the last one. Throughout 24 years, Adam Schiff advanced his profession based on a solitary, remarkable skill, articulating a narrative so persuasively that no one thought to verify its factual basis. Spanning his tenure as a federal prosecutor to his leadership of the House Intelligence Committee, leading the impeachment effort, and ultimately serving as a United States Senator, each promotion rested upon an identical groundwork, rhetoric, storylines, and charges presented with the assurance of an individual reciting an unshared script. He insisted that he possessed proof regarding Russian collusion that exceeded merely indirect or circumstantial indications. He publicly recited made-up quotations attributed to the President of the United States into the official legislative archives and subsequently categorized it as satire. He participated in the nation's most critical security meetings and immediately exited to divulge to journalists details that had been designated as classified only hours prior. During every instance the press offered praise, the cameras rolled, and nobody demanded accountability from him. Today, however, someone would. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard did not establish her profession through words, rather she constructed it through active duty. Her record included 2 combat deployments, a Bronze Star, and 2 decades wearing the uniform. She adhered to the identical oath that Adam Schiff had sworn. The distinction lay in the fact that she honored it, and now she held the documentation to demonstrate who had failed to do so. The Russell Senate Office Building's Assembly Hall was filled to maximum capacity on a Tuesday morning that political insiders would subsequently describe as the most critical hearing since the Watergate era. Nevertheless, in contrast to Watergate, the individual facing imminent ruin was not a president. It was a senator who had dedicated his entire profession to dismantling others. Adam Schiff himself had demanded this hearing. That would be the primary detail everyone recalled in retrospect. He had initiated the request. His office had transmitted an official missive to the Senate Intelligence Committee insisting that DNI Tulsi Gabbard appear to address queries concerning what Schiff termed the politicization of the intelligence community and unqualified leadership of the nation's most critical agencies. The missive leaked to CNN within 60 minutes of its transmission. By that evening, every major network had arranged panels to analyze Schiff's courageous opposition to the current administration's security appointments. Rachel Maddow allocated a comprehensive segment to commending Schiff's ongoing alertness in safeguarding democratic institutions. Schiff's aides had meticulously organized every detail. Press releases were drafted in advance for distribution at critical moments during the proceedings, and talking points were provided to sympathetic reporters who would offer real-time analysis. Even his entrance was orchestrated as he walked through the principal hallway where cameras could film him appearing resolute and grave, flanked by 2 top aides clutching voluminous binders of prepared queries. He resembled a man proceeding toward his own coronation. What he remained unaware of was that he was heading to his own autopsy. Tulsi Gabbard had arrived 30 minutes prior via a secondary entrance, carrying a solitary case, lacking a staff contingent, and without pre-positioned press. She was simply a combat veteran armed with 5 distinctively colored files and the complete authority of the American security apparatus. The assembly hall itself held a distinct irony that would not be apparent until a later time. It was the identical type of wood-paneled, camera-equipped Senate Assembly Hall where Schiff had spent years serving as the Star Inquisitor. He was the individual who posed devastating questions, who governed the narrative, and who determined what the American public would hear and what would remain concealed. He was as familiar with these chambers as a theatrical performer is with a stage. However, today, for the initial instance in his career, Adam Schiff was not the one asking the questions. The committee chair officially convened the hearing at 9 a.m. C-SPAN broadcast the signal live, CNN and MSNBC switched to comprehensive coverage, and Fox News had been streaming since 8:30 a.m. Following standard procedure, the committee extended an invitation for Senator Schiff to deliver the initial opening statement, as he had requested the hearing. Schiff stood up, not out of necessity, but because Adam Schiff invariably stood up whenever cameras were broadcasting. This was a courtroom practice lingering from his prosecutor days, serving as a physical demonstration of superiority over anyone remaining seated. He secured his jacket button with precise familiarity, modified the microphone position, and presented a 15-minute opening address that was, by any measure, a brilliant example of political maneuvering. He assaulted Gabbard's credentials with precise references to her absence of standard experience within the security community. He cast doubt on her allegiance by referencing her 2017 consultation with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. He called upon the memory of professional security officers who had dedicated their lives to safeguarding the nation, only to be supplanted by political appointees chosen for loyalty rather than capability. He even managed to incorporate a reference to his personal censure by the House, characterizing it as evidence that he posed a threat to those who evade accountability, which elicited agreeable nods from Democratic senators present. It constituted 15 minutes of impeccable political exhibition, with every phrase uttered with the conviction of an individual who truly believed he was the protagonist of this narrative. Upon concluding, Schiff resumed his seat, tidied his tie, and looked across the chamber at Tulsi Gabbard with the content look of someone who had just dictated the conditions of the engagement. Tulsi remained motionless. 5 seconds elapsed, then 10. The stillness was so total that the ventilation system's baseline hum in the chamber became audible on the C-SPAN broadcast. Ultimately, Tulsi spoke, her tone calm, measured, and completely devoid of the dramatic vocal shifts Schiff had just utilized for 15 minutes. "Are you finished, Senator?" Schiff nodded, a subtle smirk still present on his face. "I believe I have clarified my stance." "You have," Tulsi stated, "quite clearly, because in the preceding 15 minutes you did precisely what you have done for 7 years. You spoke with immense self-assurance and offered absolutely zero evidence." The smirk on Schiff's face wavered. "The distinction between today and every other day for the last 7 years," Tulsi proceeded, reaching for her case, "is that today the individual seated opposite you actually possesses proof." She unzipped the case and pulled out 5 folders, each a unique hue, red, blue, black, white, and yellow, and arranged them in a meticulous line on the table before her. Every folder was voluminous, and each displayed classification labels and agency seals. The yellow folder, positioned last in the row, was noticeably thicker than the others. Schiff leaned slightly forward, instinctively attempting to decipher the labels. Tulsi took notice, saying, "Do not be concerned, Senator. You will view each one consecutively." She placed her hand on the crimson folder, stating, "Let us begin with the falsehoods." Tulsi unsealed the red folder with the measured precision of someone who had practiced this instant not for theatrical effect but for operational accuracy. Inside were not restricted records, nor surveillance accounts, nor confidential security assessments. They were printouts, specifically transcripts of television segments, legislative records, and public addresses. "Senator Schiff," Tulsi commenced, "I wish to clarify something before we proceed. Everything within this initial file is a matter of public record. Every syllable I am about to recite was spoken by you, recorded on camera for the American populace. I have no need to declassify anything in this instance, as the proof of your lack of candor is available to anyone possessing a television and an internet link." She directed her gaze upward at the committee members, remarking, "The issue is not that the proof was concealed. The issue is that nobody in this chamber ever troubled themselves to gather it all in one spot and recite it back to him." She brought out the initial printout from March 22, 2017, referencing Chuck Todd's appearance on Meet the Press. Senator Schiff, at that time Congressman Schiff, declared, and I cite, "I am able to inform you that the issue extends beyond that, and I cannot discuss the specifics, but there exists more than circumstantial proof." Presently, she placed the printout down and lifted the subsequent one, dated March 2nd, 2017, from MSNBC. "I believe there is direct proof in the dealings between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin," Tulsi read. "Direct proof, Senator. Those were your precise words." Another printout was presented, this one from April 2nd, 2017, on CNN's State of the Union, where you informed Jake Tapper that there was extensive proof of collusion in plain view. Another from July 16th, 2018, following the Helsinki summit, you stated the proof of collusion was overwhelming and that it was concealed in plain view. Yet another from February 2019, you initiated what you termed a comprehensive inquiry into President Trump's finances in Russia, informing the American public that your committee had discovered significant proof of collusion. Tulsi organized the printouts in a tidy sequence, with each one visible to the recording devices. Subsequently, she grasped a second collection of records, these displaying official government insignia. "Now let us examine what the actual inquiries discovered," she said. She held up the primary official record, the Mueller report, noting Special Counsel Robert Mueller 2 years, $40 million, and 500 witnesses. The conclusion she read directly from the record stated, "The inquiry did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference actions." She placed it down and grasped the subsequent document, the Durham report by Special Counsel John Durham. The conclusion stated that the FBI lacked any appropriate foundation for initiating the Crossfire Hurricane inquiry. The conspiracy theory was, in Durham's terminology, predicated on unrefined, unanalyzed, and unsupported intelligence. The next record was Inspector General Michael Horowitz's. His inquiry into the FISA warrant submissions against Carter Page discovered 17 significant errors and omissions. The FISA court's presiding judge, Rosemary Collyer, stated unequivocally that the FBI had misled the tribunal. She arranged these directly opposite the television transcripts, creating two sequences of records, one row containing Schiff's assertions and one row featuring official conclusions proving every assertion false. "And here, Senator, is precisely where it becomes particularly damning," Tulsi stated. She brought forth a copy of the Schiff memorandum from February 2018, which was the Democratic response to the Nunes memorandum that had alleged FISA abuse. "This is your memorandum, Senator, authored by you, disseminated by you, and defended by you on every network that would host you. In this memorandum, you declared, and this is taken directly from the document, FBI and DOJ officials did not abuse the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act procedure, omit material details, or subvert this crucial tool to monitor the Trump campaign." She hesitated, allowing the words to resonate. Inspector General Horowitz discovered that the FBI did indeed abuse the FISA procedure, that they did omit material details, and that 17 significant errors existed. Furthermore, he found that the Steele dossier, which you supported and entered into the congressional record, played what Horowitz termed a central and essential function in securing the warrant, despite being, in his terminology, unverified and possessing only minimal support. Schiff attempted to interrupt, saying, "Director Gabbard, you are presenting these findings entirely without context, as the security community's evaluation clearly indicated that Russia—" "I am not discussing Russia, Senator." Tulsi's voice sliced through his interruption without increasing in volume. "I am discussing you, specifically about what you declared on camera to the American populace repeatedly for years." She paused for 3 seconds. Schiff parted his lips to resume speaking. "I possess additional information," Tulsi stated simply. She produced another record saying, "This is a collection compiled by my staff. Between January 2017 and December 2020, you appeared on national television 423 times to discuss the Russia inquiry. 423 appearances. During every single one, you declared or implied that you had viewed proof of collusion that the public had not viewed." She gazed directly at Schiff, stating that the Mueller inquiry lasted 2 years, expended $40 million, utilized 19 attorneys, issued 2,800 subpoenas, carried out 500 search warrants, and interviewed 500 witnesses. They discovered no conspiracy. The Durham inquiry lasted 4 years and achieved the identical conclusion from the reverse direction: the inquiry should never have been initiated. Inspector General Horowitz discovered the FBI misled the FISA tribunal utilizing the very dossier you guaranteed. You were rebuked by the House of Representatives in a formal vote, becoming the 25th member in history to receive that sanction for, and I will cite the resolution, misleading the American populace and falsehoods, misrepresentations, and abuses of sensitive details. She closed the crimson folder with a quiet snap. Senator Schiff, you made 423 television appearances over 3 years to inform America you possess proof of the grandest political conspiracy in contemporary history. I only required 10 minutes with the public record to demonstrate you were fabricating every single time. She placed her hand on the Azure folder, stating, "Now let us discuss the occasion you literally fabricated a dialogue between two world leaders and read it into the legislative archives." The atmosphere in the hearing chamber had fundamentally altered following the initial round. The journalists in the balcony were no longer casually monitoring. Rather, they were leaning forward, some standing and several frantically typing on phones. The senators on the committee continued watching with the concentrated intensity of individuals who grasped that they were witnessing a historic event. Schiff sat rigidly in his chair, his jaw set in a manner that television viewers would later categorize as either defiant or terrified, depending on their political affiliation. Tulsi unsealed the Azure folder. Inside was not a record, but a tablet. Addressing the panel, Tulsi stated, "Committee members, I would like to request authorization to broadcast a video segment from the Public Congressional Archive, specifically the September 26, 2019, hearing of the House Intelligence Committee, presided over at that time by then-Representative Adam Schiff." Authorization was granted. The hearing chamber's displays flickered to life, revealing Adam Schiff 3 years younger but unmistakable, seated in the chairman's chair of the House Intelligence Committee. This was the chair of power, the chair of authority, the chair where he had spent years constructing the narrative that he was America's final line of defense against presidential corruption. The Schiff displayed on the screen commenced speaking with the practiced assurance of a seasoned prosecutor delivering a final summation. "This is the core of what the president conveys," the on-screen Schiff declared, then proceeded into what he characterized as a synopsis of President Trump's telephone conversation with Ukrainian President Zelensky. "We have been very good to your country, very good. No other nation has done as much as we have. But you know what? I do not perceive much reciprocity here," Schiff narrated, his voice adopting a mocking imitation of Trump. "I hear what you desire. I possess a favor I desire from you, though, and I'm going to state this only 7 times, so you had better listen well. I desire you to fabricate dirt on my political adversary. Understand, lots of it." The Assembly Hall observed in silence as the on-screen Schiff persisted with his theatrical exhibition, making up dialogue, inventing menaces that never appeared in the actual call transcript, and presenting fiction as reality before millions of television viewers. Subsequently, Tulsi signaled the second segment, featuring Republican Representative Mike Turner at the identical hearing, reacting, "I actually had someone text me. Is he simply making this up?" And yes, he was. The third segment showed Schiff's personal reaction when confronted, stating that his synopsis of the president's call was intended to be, at least in part, satire. Tulsi halted the video recording. The hearing chamber was quiet. The actual Schiff, the present-day Senator Schiff seated in the witness chair, was fixated on the frozen depiction of his own countenance on the screen, observing himself from 3 years prior delivering a show that he would subsequently dismiss as comedy. Satire, Tulsi reiterated, letting the term linger in the atmosphere. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, during a formal hearing concerning a whistleblower complaint that would result in the impeachment of a sitting president, recited a completely invented version of a presidential telephone call into the official legislative archives. When discovered, he termed it satire. She rotated away from the display to face Schiff directly, stating, "I served in a combat area, Senator. In theater, when someone misrepresents intelligence, when someone fabricates details and presents it as reality, people lose their lives. We do not categorize it as satire. We term it a dereliction of responsibility that gets Americans killed. Schiff rose from his chair, not gradually and with measured steps, but abruptly like a courtroom attorney contesting inadmissible evidence. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This is not relevant to the stated objective of this hearing. Director Gabbard was summoned to analyze intelligence community restructurings, not to— The senator will assume his seat, the committee chairman stated resolutely. Director Gabbard possesses the floor. Schiff remained standing for 3 seconds. This constituted a minor act of insubordination, but the cameras recorded every moment of it. A senator refusing to sit when instructed, his jaw tight, his eyes shifting between the chairman and the screen still displaying his frozen image. Ultimately, with exaggerated gradualness designed to convey that he was electing to comply rather than being compelled, Schiff lowered himself back into his chair. However, the image was captured. The man who had spent years governing hearing chambers from the chairman's seat had just been commanded to sit down in one. Furthermore, the man who invariably possessed the ideal retort had just been muted by a gavel. Tulsi proceeded as though the disruption had not occurred, stating, "However, the satire was not an isolated incident, Senator. It was component to a consistent pattern." She brought forth records from the Azure folder, internal communications bearing the imprints of congressional office metadata. "My office has secured, through lawful oversight avenues, communications between your congressional staff and Democratic National Committee operatives in the weeks prior to the initial impeachment hearing." She read from the records regarding emails coordinating messaging approach, talking points distributed concurrently to Schiff's office and to media contacts, and timing schedules that synchronize Schiff's public declarations with pre-drafted news articles appearing within minutes of his observations. These articles were too comprehensive and too polished to have been composed in real time. On September 20th, 2019, 6 days prior to the hearing where you acted out your satire, an email from your communications director to the DNC Rapid Response stated, "Chairman desires maximum emotional resonance for opening statement. We are drafting something that captures the core rather than quoting directly. Need media prepared to amplify immediately." On September 23rd, the response from the DNC noted, "CNN and MSNBC are briefed and possess panels prepared. WAPO and NYT possess draft analysis pieces prepared. We will coordinate timing once we view the final version of opening observations." On September 25th, the day prior to the hearing, your chief of staff wrote to all staff, "Tomorrow is the show of a lifetime. Every network will be live. The chairman's opening will dictate the narrative for the entire impeachment. Everything following this concerns maintaining what we establish in tomorrow." Tulsi glanced up from the records. "Performance of a lifetime," she reiterated. "Your personal staff characterized the impeachment hearing, one of the most grave constitutional procedures in our republic, as a show." She secured the Azure folder. "You did not impeach a president because the Constitution necessitated it, Senator. You produced an exhibition because the ratings necessitated it. Furthermore, when the script lacked sufficient drama, you simply composed new lines and inserted them into the president's mouth." She hesitated, and her voice softened to a quieter register that nevertheless carried more significance than anything she had stated at maximum volume. "The distinction between a prosecutor and a performer, Senator, is that a prosecutor is concerned with whether the proof is authentic. You never were." She positioned her hand on the black folder. Schiff, who had been clenching the table's edge with both hands, visibly gulped. "Now, let us analyze where your funding originates," Tulsi stated. "Specifically, let us discuss Ed Buck." The name descended in the hearing chamber like a grenade with the pin already extracted. Ed Buck, 2 words that every political strategist in Washington recognized, and every political strategist in Washington hoped would never be articulated in association with their superior's name. Adam Schiff's response was instantaneous and unintended. He shifted backward in his chair, not dramatically, but sufficiently for the cameras to capture the action. It marked the initial instance in the hearing that his body had retreated before his mouth could construct a defense. Tulsi unsealed the black folder with the identical methodical exactness she had applied to the others, but her voice now carried a different resonance. The primary two rounds had concerned falsehoods and showmanship. This round concerned something darker. Ed Buck, Tulsi commenced, was a major donor to the Democratic Party who contributed over $500,000 to Democratic candidates, causes, and political action committees throughout his trajectory. He was convicted on 9 federal felony charges in 2021 and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. She hesitated to permit the facts to firmly establish themselves before associating them with the man seated opposite her. His criminal acts involved luring vulnerable, homeless black men to his West Hollywood apartment, injecting them with methamphetamine for his personal sexual satisfaction, and in 2 instances causing their deaths. Gemmell Moore, 26 years of age, died in Buck's apartment on July 27, 2017. Timothy Dean, 55 years of age, died in the identical apartment on January 7, 2019. A third individual, Dane Brown, survived only because he was capable of walking to a gas station and contacting 911 after Buck refused to contact an emergency vehicle. The assembly hall was absolutely motionless. This did not constitute political exhibition. These were deceased men. Among the numerous politicians who accepted Buck's funding, Tulsi proceeded, bringing out FEC records from the file, was then Representative Adam Schiff, who accepted $2,700 in direct campaign donations in 2016. She held up the submission for the recording devices. FEC records, public, authenticated. Schiff spoke instantaneously, his voice carrying the practice quality of a response prepared long ago, stating, "I donated that money to the Trevor Project, a nonprofit serving LGBTQ youth, after Mr. Buck was arrested. This is a matter of public record." "It is," Tulsi conceded. "And that is precisely the difficulty, Senator, as the chronology recounts a narrative you have never been requested to clarify." She produced a chronology record with dates organized in 2 columns, the left column listing events related to Ed Buck, and the right column listing actions taken or not taken by Adam Schiff. July 27, 2017, Gemmell Moore passes away in Ed Buck's apartment. The coroner designates it an accidental methamphetamine overdose. Moore's mother, Letitia Nixon, publicly disputes the designation. Civil rights organizations insist upon an inquiry. Activists in the Black and LGBTQ communities label Buck a dangerous sexual predator. She shifted her finger to the right-hand column. "It was vacant. Your reaction, nothing, no public comment, no return of donations, no creating distance." August through December 2017, multiple men stepped forward informing investigators that Buck injected them with methamphetamine against their violation. Court records document a pattern of predatory conduct targeting homeless black men. Right-hand column, still vacant, still nothing from your office, Senator. Throughout 2018, the Sheriff's Department inquiry persists, more victims step forward, activists hold rallies, and a petition circulating within the LGBTQ community amasses thousands of signatures demanding Democrats return Buck's funding. Regarding your reaction in 2018, Tulsi observed the right-hand column, noting that you continued to hold the donations, you did not return them, and you did not donate them. You stated nothing publicly concerning Ed Buck, regarding Gemmell Moore, regarding the inquiry, or regarding the victims who were stepping forward characterizing horrific mistreatment. January 7, 2019, Timothy Dean passes away, the second individual found dead in Ed Buck's apartment in 18 months, identical apartment, identical circumstances, another black man deceased. September 17, 2019, Buck is finally placed under arrest after a third individual barely survives an overdose at his residence. Only now, 2 years and 2 fatalities after Gemmell Moore, do you donate the money to charity. Tulsi placed the chronology document down. Senator, you retained money from an individual whose apartment was a crime scene for 2 years, throughout 1 fatality, throughout victim after victim stepping forward, throughout community organizations, imploring Democratic politicians to return the funding, and throughout a second fatality. You acted only when the arrest rendered continued silence politically unfeasible. Schiff's hand shifted beneath the table. Tulsi monitored the motion but persisted in speaking. However, the financial association extends deeper than $2,700. She brought forth additional records, including event records, fundraiser logs, and political networking data. Buck's $500,000 in Democratic donations purchased him entry to a network of politicians, fundraisers, and party functions spanning over a decade. Our analysis of political event records indicates multiple occasions where you and Buck were present at the identical Democratic fundraisers, the identical party functions, and the identical donor assemblies in the Los Angeles area. She held up photographs, specifically event photos from public political assemblies, the type captured at every fundraiser in America, showing Buck visible and Schiff visible at the identical functions. The issue is not whether you recognized Ed Buck, Senator. Half the California Democratic establishment recognized Ed Buck. The issue is what you recognized regarding his actions when you recognized it, and why an individual who characterizes himself as a proponent of justice remained silent while vulnerable men were being victimized by one of his party's largest donors. Schiff's hand was now distinctively on his telephone beneath the table. He was gazing downward, not at Tulsi or the committee, but at his lap. Tulsi took notice, asking, "Senator, whom are you contacting, your attorney or the individual who composes your talking points?" Schiff looked upward abruptly, his expression caught between irritation and amazement, the gaze of someone who had been observed performing something they believed was concealed. "I would recommend you set the telephone aside," Tulsi stated, her voice carrying not animosity but something more shattering, compassion. "Nobody is coming to assist you, Senator, not today." He set the telephone down, and for the initial instant since the hearing commenced, his hands were visible on the table, and they were not entirely steady. Tulsi rotated to address the committee. "I wish to be explicit regarding what I am not alleging. I am not alleging that Senator Schiff took part in or was cognizant of Ed Buck's specific criminal acts. What I am illustrating is a pattern, the identical pattern we have observed in the primary 2 rounds. Adam Schiff positions himself as a proponent of truth, of justice, of accountability. However, when accountability demands personal sacrifice, when it signifies returning money, alienating a donor, or speaking up when it is inconvenient, he selects silence." She shifted her gaze back to Schiff. "Gemmell Moore merited better than your silence, Senator. Timothy Dean merited better. Dane Brown, who survived, merited better. And the American populace you assert to serve merit to know that your dedication to justice possesses a price tag." She secured the black folder. "You term yourself a combatant for truth, but when a major donor within your own party was taking the lives of vulnerable black men, you could not locate a single word to utter until handcuffs rendered the silence more perilous than speech." She grasped for the white folder. "Now let us analyze how the chairman of the Intelligence Committee utilized classified details as a political instrument." The primary 3 rounds had dismantled Adam Schiff's public image, the truth-teller who fabricated, the constitutional guardian who performed, and the justice proponent who remained silent. However, the white folder contained something different, something that went beyond reputation and into the sphere of criminal conduct. Tulsi unsealed it, and the records inside bore markers that the senators on the committee recognized instantaneously: NSA metadata analysis headers, SCIF access logs, and security community security protocols. "Senator Schiff," Tulsi commenced, and her tone shifted to the concise operational cadence of a security briefing. "Throughout your tenure as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee from 2019 to 2023, you held one of the most critical positions within the United States government. You possessed entry to compartmented intelligence programs, SCIF facilities, and classified briefings from the CIA, NSA, and every other component of the security community." She brought forth the initial record, a spreadsheet-style printout dense with timestamps and entry codes. "This is a collection of your SCIF access records during your chairmanship, dates, times, length of visits, and the classification level of materials accessed." She moved her finger down the left-hand column. "January 14, 2020, SCIF access, 9:47 a.m. to 11:23 a.m., classified briefing concerning ongoing counterintelligence operations." Subsequently, she shifted to a second record positioned alongside the first. And this is a collection of media accounts containing details that could only have originated from classified briefings of the category you attended. She aligned the two records so the dates were adjacent. January 14, 2020, your SCIF visit concludes at 11:23 a.m. She directed attention to the second record. January 14, 2020, at 2:17 p.m., less than 3 hours later, CNN issues an account containing specifics regarding counterintelligence concerns that align with the substance of the briefing you attended that morning. She proceeded down the chronology. March 3, 2020, SCIF access, 10 a.m. to 12:15 p.m., briefing concerning signals intelligence related to foreign election interference. Subsequently, March 3, 2020, at 4:42 p.m., The Washington Post issues an article with specifics that correspond directly to the signals intelligence briefing. April 17, 2020, SCIF access, 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., classified briefing concerning specific surveillance programs. Subsequently, April 17, 2020, at 8:15 p.m., MSNBC's evening programming features reporting on surveillance actions that references specifics consistent with that afternoon's briefing. She persisted down the catalog, presenting 5 additional examples, then 8 more, totaling 12 specific instances where the configuration was identical. Schiff enters the STCIF, accepts a classified briefing, and within hours media accounts surface containing details that mirror the substance of what was discussed. 12 instances in 14 months, Senator, Tulsi stated. 12 times you accessed classified details, and within the identical day, media accounts appeared with specifics that correspond to those briefings. Schiff's countenance had settled into an expression that experienced poker players would recognize as a compelled blankness, the intentional absence of reaction that paradoxically reveals how much exertion is being expended to conceal one. However, it is not merely the timing, Tulsi proceeded. The security community carried out a comprehensive metadata analysis of communications originating from devices registered to your office during the intervals immediately following these SCIF sessions. She produced the metadata analysis, not content, not recordings, just configurations, numbers contacting numbers, times, lengths, and frequencies. In 10 of the 12 instances, communications from devices associated with your office contacted numbers associated with specific journalists at CNN, The Washington Post, and MSNBC within the interval between your SCIF exit and the subsequent issuance of the corresponding story. She held up the metadata chart. I wish to be precise here. This is metadata, not content. We are not listening to calls. We are analyzing configurations, and the configuration is as clear as a fingerprint. She positioned the chart on the table, visible to cameras. Communications from your office to these specific journalist devices occurred an average of 47 minutes after your SCIF sessions concluded. In 8 of those instances, the communications lasted between 12 and 23 minutes, long enough to convey substantive details, short enough to elude routine monitoring indicators. Schiff reached for his microphone, his hand hovering over it. Then he pushed it away from him, a deliberate, visible action of refusal. I will not dignify this with a response, he stated, his voice audible but no longer amplified. The hearing chamber fell silent. The absence of Schiff's voice, the voice that had filled hearing chambers, television studios, and press conferences for 2 decades, was suddenly the loudest element in the room. Tulsi permitted the silence to extend for 5 full seconds, then stated quietly, for the initial instance in 24 years, Senator Schiff possesses nothing to say. I believe that speaks louder than 423 television appearances ever did. She allowed another moment to pass before proceeding. The unauthorized disclosure of classified details is a federal offense under 18 U.S. Code Section 798. Each instance carries a potential sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. She directed her gaze at the metadata analysis, then back at Schiff. 12 instances, up to 10 years each. The arithmetic is not complicated, Senator. She returned the records to the white folder and secured it. You utilized the chairmanship of the Intelligence Committee, the position entrusted with protecting America's most critical secrets, not as a shield for national security, but as a sword for political warfare. You took details that security officers risked their lives to gather and utilized it as currency to purchase favorable media coverage. Her voice carried the weight of someone who grasped what classified details signified in operational terms. Every leak potentially compromised sources. Every unauthorized disclosure potentially endangered the men and women, many of them in uniform just like I was, who gathered that intelligence in the field. You treated their effort, their risk, and their sacrifice as raw material for your political narrative. She positioned her hand on the final folder, the yellow one, which was the thickest. Now, Senator, let us analyze the complete picture because the falsehoods, the shows, the dark money, and the leaks are not isolated incidents. They are components of something much grander. Tulsi unsealed the yellow folder, and what she extracted was not a record, but a large folded chart, the type utilized in security briefings to map organizational structures of adversary networks. She unfolded it methodically, and an assistant helped mount it on an easel positioned so that both the committee and the cameras could view it clearly. The chart was dense with names, lines, arrows, and color-coded associations. At its center, within a circle larger than any other on the chart, was one name, Adam Schiff. Radiating outward from the center were branches connecting to 4 categories, each color-coded: media, azure lines, political operatives, crimson lines, security community contacts, emerald lines, and financial network, black lines. Schiff stared at the chart. It marked the initial instance in the hearing that he looked at something Tulsi had produced with what appeared to be genuine astonishment rather than practiced indignation. Perhaps because he recognized the format, it was identical to the network analysis charts the Intelligence Committee utilized to brief members on foreign adversary operations. He was observing himself mapped like a target. Senator Schiff, Tulsi commenced, standing for the initial instance in the hearing to address the chart directly. For the preceding 4 rounds, I have presented proof of individual patterns of misconduct. The falsehoods regarding Russia collusion, the fabricated testimony during impeachment, the financial associations with convicted criminals, and the unauthorized disclosure of classified details. She touched the center of the chart. However, these are not separate failures of character. They are the interconnected components of a solitary operation, a systematic campaign to weaponize the security community, coordinate with media allies, and leverage political networks to manufacture and sustain a false narrative for political gain. She commenced tracing the azure lines, the media connections. Between 2017 and 2023, my office has identified a network of 17 journalists across 5 major outlets who accepted details, talking points, or direct guidance from your office on a regular basis. These are not casual press contacts. These are operational relationships where details flowed in one direction, from your office to their publications, timed to support specific political objectives. She pointed to specific nodes on the chart. These journalists did not independently arrive at the same conclusions you were promoting. They accepted the conclusions first and constructed their reporting around them. The Russia collusion narrative was not discovered by investigative journalism. It was manufactured by your office and distributed through a media network that functioned more like an amplification system than a free press. She shifted to the crimson lines, representing political operatives. The coordination with DNC operatives that we observed in the impeachment communications was not a one-time collaboration. It was an ongoing operational structure. Your staff maintained regular, documented contact with Democratic Party messaging operations. Talking points were synchronized, timing was coordinated, and media appearances were scheduled to create the appearance of organic, widespread concern about issues that were in reality being promoted by a centralized messaging operation with you at its center. She traced the emerald lines indicating security community contacts. Most concerning are these associations, she stated, pointing to a cluster of names branching from the security community section. Former security officials who appeared on television as independent analysts presenting what they characterized as their professional assessment were in regular contact with your office. Their analysis was not independent, their talking points aligned with your messaging. When they went on CNN or MSNBC to validate your assertions regarding Russia collusion or FISA compliance, They were reinforcing a narrative they had helped you construct. This is why three separate inquiries, Mueller, Durham, and Horowitz, found your assertions to be false, and yet you persisted in making them. You were not relying on intelligence, you were relying on the echo chamber you had built. Your office fed details to media contacts who issued it. Former security officials then validated it on television, citing the media accounts, and then you cited the media accounts and the former officials as confirmation of what you had planted in the initial place. She stepped back from the chart so the full scope was visible, showing a closed loop, a self-reinforcing cycle of manufactured consensus, and you were the architect at the center of it all. Tulsi rotated from the chart to face shift directly. Senator, you spent 7 years constructing a narrative that there was a vast conspiracy against America with Donald Trump at its center. You were correct regarding one thing. There was a conspiracy, an organized, sustained campaign to mislead the American populace, utilizing the machinery of intelligence oversight, media relationships, and political coordination. She directed attention at the chart one final time, stating, "You were just incorrect regarding who was at the center." Schiff stood up. The action was sufficiently sudden that his chair scraped against the floor with a sound that sliced through the stillness of the hearing chamber. He was looking toward the door, the main exit where the hallway led to elevators, and beyond that, the building's exits. It constituted a reflexive action, the instinct to depart, to escape the chamber where his career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom were being systematically dismantled. However, then his eyes tracked to the cameras. All of them were directed at him. C-SPAN, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all live, all recording. He grasped in that instant what departing would signify. The image of Adam Schiff walking out of his personal hearing, the hearing he had demanded, would constitute the final image of his career. It would play on a loop endlessly, the man who fled. He stood frozen for 3 seconds, caught between the door and the cameras, between escape and exposure, between the instinct for self-preservation and the politician's understanding that the optics of fleeing were worse than the optics of remaining. Gradually, he resumed his seat, but it was too late. Millions of viewers had observed Senator Adam Schiff, the man who never backed down, the man who invariably possessed an answer, the man who invariably governed the chamber, stand up, look at the door, and visibly contemplate fleeing. Tulsi observed him settle back into his chair. Her expression was not triumphant. If anything, it was the expression of someone completing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "That is the initial, honest thing you have performed today, Senator," she stated quietly, resuming her seat, facing it. Tulsi gathered the 5 folders, red, blue, black, white, yellow, and stacked them in a single tidy pile at the center of the table. 5 hues, 5 rounds, 5 layers of a career built on fabrication, now stripped bare under the lights of a Senate hearing chamber. She remained standing. "Senator Adam Schiff," she commenced, her voice carrying the formal cadence of someone delivering a final operational assessment. "Over the course of this hearing, we have established the following through documented proof and public record. First, for 7 years across 423 television appearances, you informed the American populace that you possess proof of Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. 3 separate inquiries, Mueller, Durham, and Inspector General Horowitz, conclusively determined that no such proof existed, that the inquiry was improperly predicated, and that the FISA tribunal was misled. Your personal memorandum defending the FISA applications was proven false on every material point. Second, as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, you read a fabricated version of a presidential telephone call into the legislative archives during a formal impeachment hearing, presenting fiction as reality before millions of Americans. Internal communications from your personal office characterized this proceeding not as a solemn constitutional duty, but as the performance of a lifetime. Third, you maintained financial and social associations with Ed Buck, a Democratic major donor convicted of 9 federal felonies, including the methamphetamine-related deaths of 2 vulnerable black men. You retained his donations for 2 years following the primary fatality in his apartment, returning the money only after his arrest rendered continued silence politically untenable. Fourth, metadata analysis of communications configurations reveals 12 instances in 14 months where your SCIF access was followed within hours by media accounts containing details consistent with the classified briefings you had attended. Communications from devices associated with your office contacted specific journalists in the interval between your SCIF sessions and subsequent publications. Fifth, these individual patterns of misconduct, the falsehoods, the shows, the donor relationships, the unauthorized disclosures, are not isolated failures. They are components of a coordinated network you constructed and operated from the center, utilizing media contacts, political operatives, and former security officials to manufacture and sustain false narratives for political purposes. She paused. The hearing chamber was quiet except for the subtle mechanical sounds of cameras and the ventilation system. As Director of National Intelligence, I am today implementing the following actions. 1. All proof presented in this hearing, including SCIF access records and metadata analysis, is being referred to the Department of Justice for a criminal inquiry under 18 U.S. Code Section 798, governing the unauthorized disclosure of classified details. 2. A formal referral is being submitted to the Senate Ethics Committee for inquiry of Senator Schiff's conduct during his tenure as House Intelligence Committee Chairman and his actions documented in this hearing. 3. The security community is conducting a comprehensive damage assessment to determine the operational impact of the classified details disclosed through the unauthorized avenues documented in our metadata analysis. 4. I am recommending to the President that Senator Schiff's current security clearance be immediately suspended pending the outcome of the Department of Justice inquiry. She looked at Schiff one final time, asking, "Senator, do you wish to respond?" Every camera in the chamber adjusted to frame Adam Schiff's countenance. The C-SPAN signal went to a tight shot. CNN's live coverage displayed a split screen showing Tulsi standing on the left and Schiff seated on the right. America observed. Adam Schiff opened his mouth. No sound emerged. He closed it. His lips pressed together and his jaw worked slightly, the way it does when someone is trying to formulate words that will not come. Yes. He opened his mouth again. Nothing. 5 seconds of silence on live television. The man who had delivered 423 television shows regarding proof he did not possess, the man who had read fabricated dialogue into the legislative archives and termed it satire, the man who invariably possessed a narrative, invariably possessed an accusation, and invariably possessed a perfectly crafted sentence prepared for any camera directed in his vicinity. For the initial instance in 24 years of public life, Adam Schiff could not locate a single word to utter. 10 seconds elapsed. The silence was not dramatic, it was not cinematic. It was something worse. It was empty. It was the silence of a man who had constructed everything on words, discovering that when every word has been proven false, there are no words remaining. 15 seconds passed. It was not tears. Nancy Pelosi had tears, and tears at least contain emotion, and emotion can be interpreted as humanity. What was on Adam Schiff's face was absence, the expression of someone who has reached for the tool they have relied on their entire life and found it missing. Tulsi gathered her folders with the identical methodical precision with which she had unsealed them. She nodded to the committee chairman, a brief professional acknowledgement. Then she grasped her case and walked toward the exit. There was no victory speech, no dramatic final line, no performing for the cameras. She was just a soldier who had completed her mission. The last image before CNN switched to its panel of stunned commentators was Adam Schiff alone at the witness table, microphones still live, cameras still recording, an empty water glass beside him fixated on the space where Tulsi Gabbard had been seated. He still had not spoken. The segment they would label the silence commenced trending within 90 seconds of the hearing's conclusion. Not the disclosures regarding Russia, not the Ed Buck Association, not the FISA falsehoods, or the metadata analysis or the network chart. The 15 seconds of Adam Schiff sitting mute before a live microphone became the defining image of the entire hearing. It was shared 500 million times in the initial 48 hours. The figure was unprecedented, not because of the political content, but because of what it represented visually. The most articulate man in American politics, rendered speechless by the weight of his own documented dishonesty. The internet memes were immediate and merciless. Schiff's satire of silence, 423 appearances, 0 words left, when every lie has been filed. However, beneath the viral content was something more significant. The sense shared across political lines that something genuinely had altered. Not because a politician had been embarrassed, but because the mechanism by which he had operated for years had been exposed for public inspection. The network chart became particularly devastating in the aftermath. Within hours of the hearing, journalists whose names appeared on the chart commenced issuing declarations. Some denied the associations, some declined to comment, and 3 resigned from their positions before the end of the week. 2 others were placed on administrative leave by their networks pending internal reviews. The former security officials mapped on the chart faced their personal reckoning. Cable news bookings for former IC officials dropped by 60% in the month following the hearing, as networks suddenly became cautious about presenting analysts whose independence had been publicly questioned. The political fallout moved with unusual speed. 12 Democratic senators issued declarations within 24 hours. The declarations varied in tone. Some expressed concern regarding the allegations, while others called for a thorough and fair inquiry. However, the subtext was uniform: distance. Every declaration constituted a step away from Adam Schiff. The Senate Ethics Committee announced a formal inquiry within 72 hours. The Department of Justice confirmed receipt of the criminal referral and stated that it was reviewing the proof presented by the Director of National Intelligence. Legal analysts noted that the metadata proof, while not conclusive on its own, provided sufficient basis for a grand jury inquiry. Schiff's personal response came 36 hours after the hearing, not in a press conference, not on CNN, nor on MSNBC, but in a written declaration released through his Senate office. It marked the initial instance in his career that he had addressed a major political crisis without appearing on camera. The declaration labeled the hearing a politically motivated attack and stated that every action I have taken was in service of the American populace. The declaration was 2 paragraphs in length. From the man who had given 15-minute opening addresses and 20-minute interviews for 2 decades, 2 paragraphs. The brevity conveyed more than the words within. Within a week, Schiff was removed from his committee assignments pending inquiry. Within a month, the DOJ opened a formal grand jury inquiry into the unauthorized disclosure of classified details. Within 2 months, 3 members of his former staff had accepted immunity agreements in exchange for cooperation. The legal process would require time. The political process did not wait. Schiff did not resign. He continued to hold his Senate seat, attending floor votes but no longer speaking on the floor. He no longer appeared on television, and he no longer issued declarations regarding intelligence matters. The man who had averaged 2 television appearances per week for 7 years simply ceased appearing. His silence, which had constituted the most devastating moment of the hearing, became the permanent condition of his political career. For Tulsi Gabbard, the aftermath was defined less by public triumph than by private action. She did not grant post-hearing interviews, nor did she appear on friendly networks for victory laps. On the evening of the hearing, she made calls to families of security officers whose operations may have been compromised by the classified leaks documented in the metadata analysis. These calls were not publicized, they were not leaked, and they were not performed for cameras. They were the actions of someone who grasped that the objective of the hearing was not to destroy Adam Schiff. It was to protect the people his actions had endangered. 3 weeks subsequent to the hearing, a retired FBI supervisory special agent named Karen Whitfield watched the complete C-SPAN recording for the 4th time from her residence in Northern Virginia. She had departed the Bureau in 2018, quietly and without public explanation, after raising internal concerns regarding the handling of the FISA applications that she believed violated the constitutional rights of American citizens. Her concerns had been noted, filed, and disregarded. She had been encouraged to let the process work. The process had not worked. She had departed, and for 5 years she had watched from the outside as the man who had championed those flawed applications continued to advance. When the recording reached the silence, The 15 seconds of Schiff sitting mute, Karen Whitfield's husband discovered her at the kitchen table with tears on her cheeks. "Are you okay?" he inquired. "Yes," she stated. "Finally, yes." She had never anticipated vindication. Professional security practitioners rarely do. They grasp that the effort they perform often goes unacknowledged and that the systems they serve sometimes fail them. What she had hoped for, and what she had nearly ceased hoping for, was that someone with the authority and the proof would simply speak the truth. "Someone finally stated it," she informed her husband. "Someone with stars on their shoulder finally stood up and stated what we all recognized." She was not alone. Across the security community, in agencies scattered across the Washington metropolitan area and around the globe, practitioners who had spent years watching their effort weaponized by political actors quietly acknowledged that something had altered. Not everything, not overnight, but something. The Director of National Intelligence had walked into a Senate hearing chamber, unsealed 5 folders, and demonstrated that accountability was not a partisan concept. It was an operational one. The same way security operations necessitated discipline, verification, and accountability, so did the institutions that oversaw them. 1 year later, Adam Schiff's grand jury returned an indictment on 4 counts of unauthorized disclosure of classified details. He became the initial sitting senator to face federal espionage charges in modern American history. The trial date was established, the proof was public, and the man who had spent his career wielding words as weapons would finally have to face them in a courtroom where the rules of proof applied. The man who invariably possessed something to say would have to answer to a jury, and this time satire would not be accepted as a defense. If you have proceeded this far, you have witnessed something America has been anticipating since 2017. The man who spent 7 years informing you he possessed proof finally encountered someone who actually did. Support this content if the truth ultimately triumphed. Subscribe for more material exposing the individuals who have been misleading America for decades. Share this narrative with everyone who recalls being informed there was more than circumstantial proof and has been awaiting accountability ever since. Offer comments below regarding who should confront the 5 folders next, which politician has been concealing behind words instead of proof. Let us know. Activate notifications because this is merely the commencement. The network chart possessed more names than just Adam Schiff's. The inquiry is ongoing and Director Gabbard possesses additional folders. Divine blessings upon our security practitioners who perform the authentic effort. Divine blessings upon the veterans who recognize the distinction between service and showmanship. And divine blessings upon every American who never ceased believing that truth would eventually overtake the fabricators. The silence is louder than 423 falsehoods ever were.